Hello, everyone, and welcome back to It's Lifey Conversations. So glad that you all could be here today, and I hope that these conversations provide you with some insight, information, and resources as you continue on your widowhood journey. I know these times are really difficult, and so I do my best to speak with really wonderful people who can help you personally and also give you a broader view of specific topics. And so I am excited to announce, or not announce, that sounds very formal. And I said this wasn't formal because it's never formal. I'm excited to introduce you to, how's that? Cindy, I will let her introduce herself and then we'll just have a conversation about kind of how spirituality and how, religious institutions can really provide a safe space for people, and mainly, Cindy and I were just talking before this as a place of connection.
Yeah,
So I'll let you take it away. You can introduce yourself and maybe just talk a little bit about what your journey was to get to what you're doing today.
great. Good. Thank you, Jen. And thank you for all the good work, all the good stuff you're doing for people right now. So I'm Cindy Worthington-Berry. I'm the pastor of First Congregational Church in Natick, Massachusetts. And I was just thinking every week at the beginning of worship, I invite folks to do a few things that maybe Jen, you and I can do now. So I invite folks to take a deep breath and lower their shoulders. I don't know everybody else, but my shoulders are on my ears. And even like relax their face muscles because my face muscles get tense and like maybe even smile. Maybe even if people don't feel like smiling, just letting that their face muscles go in that direction. And when we do that at the beginning of the worship service, I look out and it looks to me like that is the first deep breath folks have taken all week long. But really, part of why I'm doing it is because it's probably the first deep breath I've taken in a while.
Yeah.
So, a little bit about where I've come from. First Congregational Church is in the Christian tradition. It's in the Protestant branch of that tree, and our denomination is the United Church of Christ. We're an open and affirming congregation, which means we're fully welcoming people of all sexual orientations, gender identities, and gender expressions. That's something that's really important to us as a congregation. I have been a pastor for almost 30 years.
Wow.
Uh, I grew up in the church, went right from college to seminary. But the interesting thing is, growing up in the church, I thought it was very boring. And I was also mad at the church. The more I learned about what the Christian tradition, the impact it has had on people for the pain and violence that the church has caused, I've just been really mad at the church's history. But it kept being the best place for me to explore meaning and connection and that presence that I call God, but some people call love or a higher power or nature or energy or whatever. So I decided to stay in the church, but try to be responsible and accountable for what the church has done. So that's how I've gotten here.
And it almost, I know you're gonna laugh at me, but it like brings tears to my eyes a little bit because I know you and I know your church. And for people who don't know this about me, I was raised Jewish,
Mhm.
and City's Church is right in town, in the town that I live in. And I have just watched the programming you do, the support you give, the flags that are outside during Pride Month, the flags that are outside during, opioid abuse, support month. Like you are so welcoming. And, just the programs that you run that are so, I would say, perhaps a little non-traditional, but that match exactly what you're trying to say. Like, how do you
Right.
find meaning in this? And
That's
how do you
right.
find like the spiritual nature in it that isn't so like harsh?
Yeah.
Um, so yes. So
I love being,
I admire the work that you do and what you give to this community. I mean, everybody loves you.
Well, we're very lucky to be in Natick and to have this place downtown where we can use our physical plant to
Hmm.
express our values.
Yeah.
And that isn't always easy. People don't always agree, but
Mhm.
they are our values that comes from our faith perspective. So we'll keep proclaiming them.
Yes, absolutely. So, obviously we talk a lot about grief.
Yes.
This is, the most of the people that listen to this are widows. And there, I imagine, are a lot of intersections in your profession with death. I'm just going to say it like it is.
Yes.
And so, I know, I'm sure there's a lot of one-on-one connections, where you're with people as they're, processing, maybe there's some group interactions, what are some of the things that um you currently do to support those who are, going through loss?
Yeah. So, I should just be clear, I'm not speaking for any other religious
Yeah,
traditions or other
no.
churches or even the people in
Just
my
you, just you.
congregation.
Okay.
Just me. And the other thing is, I'm not a widow and I cannot know what it's like.
Mhm.
I actually think if I was a widow, I could still only know what it was like for me.
Right.
So I try not to sort of make assumptions about where people are coming from. But over the years, I've just been by the side of so many people whose partners are dying or have died. And I think it is just horrible, but holy ground. Um, I know there are a number of religious communities that do offer support groups or specific programs. Most of my work has been one-on-one,
Mhm.
being with families as someone is dying, working on planning a funeral. And then short term, what we call pastoral counseling. I'm not a trained therapist, but I can meet with someone and be a listening ear and talk to them about what they're going through.
Yeah.
The thing for me is I can be there for the long haul. Um, I think there's this cliche that the first year of grief is the hardest. And that might be true for some people, but from what I've seen, no, the first year is just the beginning.
Hmm.
And sometimes the second year is harder, sometimes the third year is
Yeah.
harder. And the way the world just expects people to go back to normal so fast when there is no normal and there's no going back. Um, but I can just be there sort of like in their lives year after year, remembering the anniversary, talking to them, giving them space. They might need to keep telling the story of the loss over and over again. And so I can be there that listening ear. And also, I often know the family, the
Mhm.
history. So I've got maybe a little more context. And then also when there are joys, I'm there to be part of that too. So, like I said, most of my work has really been one-on-one.
Yeah. I recently went to a funeral. It was a friend's
Mm-hmm.
dad, who was very involved in his temple, and
Mm-hmm.
the rabbi and the cantor both gave eulogies,
Mm-hmm.
which I thought was so beautiful because they knew him so
Yeah.
well. They could get up and talk about him. It wasn't just the generic kind of who he was. Like they
Right.
deeply knew him, because he had spent, so much time and he went, regularly to services and he spent the time talking to him.
Yeah.
And so I really do, I admire that. And you pointing out the longevity point also is that some of the things that I hear from widows all the time is that people rush in when somebody passes
Mm-hmm.
and then they leave.
Right.
And
Yep.
part of that, I think that, and we discuss this, is people's
Absolutely.
uncomfortability with death.
Yep.
And they don't know what to do. And so they come in and they're, I'm so sorry, and they're there for like the initial part, and then they don't know what to do with themselves.
Yeah.
And so they just kind of wander off away. And it happens with friends, families,
Family.
like it's kind of crazy. And so I love that you pointed out that longevity piece. And really understanding that this grief doesn't just go away.
Right. Well,
So,
let me just say
yeah.
one of the things that you made me think of that I really hadn't thought of before, that I think one of the things I help is coach other people in how to walk alongside people who are grieving. So we just came through the season of Lent holy season in the Christian tradition. And this year, the whole 6 weeks of Lent, we talked about death. We talked about death and dying again and again and again. And part of what I was talking about with people is, all right, first of all, we're going to call it death. We're not going to call it they lost someone or they passed away. So we talked about language. We talked about when to show up with people and how to show up and how, yes, it is uncomfortable.
Hmm.
That's what you're there for, is to hold some of the discomfort. So anyway, just thinking that part of what I can do is help people who aren't grieving
Right.
get grow some muscles for
Yeah.
being there for people who are grieving.
And that's so incredibly important and something that I've thought about, in the
Mm,
work I do, if I were to expand
yep.
um, is doing some of that work. In fact, there's a woman I know who talks to and goes and trains corporations how to talk about death in the workplace. And I think it's like brilliant because when you have a colleague whose
Yes,
partner died or have you, like nobody knows what to do there either. It's just
right.
not a part of our culture.
That's right.
And so, I always thought that was really interesting. So,
Love
so
that.
how can spirituality
Yeah.
be both a safe place for someone who's grieving and sometimes maybe an unsafe place?
Yeah, let's start with the unsafe place. I mean, I think it's important to recognize that religious communities have caused harm when people are grieving. Sometimes you hear the terrible theology like he's in a better place. No. Or God just needed another angel. No, we're not doing any of that. I also think sometimes religious communities can have trouble making room for the complex. Maybe your relationship with the person who died wasn't great and you're more mad than sad.
Mhm.
Um, and the religious community is having a hard time giving room to that. Um, Also, sometimes religious communities might do things that make us feel guilt or shame or judgment. We need to be able to talk about how somebody died of an overdose or died by suicide and be glad that they are free from whatever burdens they carried and are now held by love or God or whatever we believe in. So we need to make sure, first of all, that religious communities aren't causing more harm. Um, but then it can be such a resource. And I tend to think of this in sort of three ways. The first is like a healthy connection,
Mhm.
that sense of community that people who actually are in different places in their lives, but accepting where each other is, that they can be together and all need each other. So there's something sometimes about the variety in the community that I think can be helpful for somebody who's grieving, because not everybody there is grieving. So it brings in some different emotions. Um, for me, a spiritual community is also about meaning making in the sense of how do I go on? Why am I here? What difference can I make? And again, that meaning is not about any sort of religious doctrine, but
No,
just
yeah.
what is meaningful in my life for me. And I think when our lives have been so upended, that meaning making can be particularly helpful. And then grounding, practices like singing, prayer, meditation, a sense of that force, whether we call it God or love or nature, whatever the biggest thing is that we believe in, and just being for a bit. So again, I'm in the Christian tradition. We have worship service on Sunday morning. It's for about an hour. And the way I look at it is if someone just comes and sits there for an hour and doesn't listen to a thing I say, but just like is able to just be for an hour, that's
Yeah.
awesome. That's more than enough.
Yeah.
Um, so I think churches, mosques, and temples, these are obvious places to find these kinds of things, but some people find it in yoga classes and book groups and support groups. I think Lifey and Hope Hub, like you are creating this kind of space. You are creating, meaning, grounding, and connection in the community you're creating.
Um, I love all of that. I think the diversity piece is really
Mm.
important because, even in my community, we often say, I just did a retreat 2 weeks ago and there were 15 women and we kind of put ourselves in this little cocoon of widowhood,
Yep.
and then we emerged and everybody was like, oh, like here we are in like real life again. And so having to like deal with other people who don't understand, or as you said, are at different phases in your life, are really, is really important. Um, and I also think, yes, I know you pointed out some of the maybe not so great pieces, but I think for the most part, especially people who have religious, have a lot of, faith in their religion, what have you. I think they do find it as a safer space.
Mhm.
Um, there's not a lot of support groups out there. I mean, there are some, but they're hard to find. It's why I do what I do. And so it's a natural place to go. And for that, I love any sort of, doesn't matter, what the religion is that it provides a place for someone to go when they don't know where else to go.
I think
Um,
that's so true. So like when I know someone who's moving to a new area, like even someone who
yeah,
has no affiliation with my church, like even my kids, I'm like, go find a religious community.
totally. Absolutely.
I don't care what they believe. Just I mean, I care a little bit, right?
Yeah,
But basically look for a way to get connected and supported.
absolutely. It makes me think of my best friend, who is also Jewish, moved to
Mm.
Nashville,
Oh,
to, a predominantly non-Jewish community.
yeah.
And the first thing she did was call the local rabbi and say, okay, what school district should my kids be in? What area neighborhood should we think of living in? Like, what are the best restaurants? Like, it was kind of like, again, it was a solid person that she felt as though she could trust.
Right,
And I think,
right,
when, your mind is so it's crazy, it's chaotic, it's
right.
empty, it's all of those things at once. So just to have a place to go, I think is just, it's a beautiful thing. And so how are different ways people can get involved with their religious institution of choice, besides maybe the traditional going to service on Sundays? I mean, that's
Yeah.
one of them, obviously, but
I think that's often not the first
mm,
step
okay.
anymore, thanks to the internet. And I think this is so like we know like loneliness is such a big issue across our
Yeah.
society. And especially then, if you are grieving, if you have lost your partner, your co-parent, your best friend, right? Like it just is
Mhm.
so much more intense. I do have to say, I know you can be lonely in a crowd. So
Yeah.
sometimes I do worry that someone might be in a room of people and still feeling
Mhm.
lonely, especially because sometimes religious communities are really family focused. So I just want to say, people like keep
Yeah.
taking care of yourself, right?
Right, right.
In the midst of that. But these days, a lot of people, you start with a website of different religious
Yeah.
communities that you might be contemplating. And part of what I suggest to folks is like, does the language on the website resonate? You might not even know why, but
Mhm.
there's something about the word choices that
Mhm.
speak to you. And then a lot of folks, if they can find a recording of a worship service first, or if it's streaming, they'll start there because it just feels a little safer
Mhm.
to watch a recording. And then still on that website, checking out the activities. Do they sound like they are things that would be fun to you? And the thing I say is like, if it doesn't all appeal, that's okay. That's great. You don't need this perfect match, because also sometimes maybe there's going to be something that's going to stretch you. But if you generally feel like there's synchronicity, then that might mean that it's a good place to start. Certainly, like
I really like that. That advice is really good. And you're right. You can find it all on a website. You don't have to go into a building and look at the flyers that are, stuck up on the pin board and all of that anymore. I think that, and correct me if I'm wrong, the other thing that I think religious institutions do really well is community service. And, whether it's, somehow connecting to helping other people in some ways. And I know a lot of widows who have found that really fulfilling. And whether it's working in food delivery services, for their church, or helping the elderly, or helping, work at the preschool, or whatever it is, like you, there's a fulfillment when you're giving back to others. And oftentimes, religious institutions give you that opportunity to do that.
It's baked in, right? Like even if it's so from the standpoint of, oh, somebody in the congregation just had a baby, so people are making meals for them, right? So
Right,
it can be as
right,
close as that, as well as big as, oh, now this community, this religious community is going out and doing something in the world. I often suggest that sometimes folks start with a one-off, you
mhm,
know, the religious community is having a yard sale. Okay, you might
yeah,
sign up to help with the yard sale, or
right,
like they're hosting a dinner, you help serve at the dinner. You might not quite be ready to commit to, oh, I'm going to do the month. You might not be ready to commit to the monthly food delivery,
right,
because you might want to try something small first. And religious communities are used to that. We create those kind of opportunities because we know people need to be able to try something, especially for somebody who might be feeling like overwhelmed in their life.
right, right.
We don't want to necessarily be like, oh, sure, now sign up for everything and you
Unless you're
know.
me, because that's what I do.
And then
That's
we
that's
sit with
my
you,
that's my
Jen.
coping mechanism of choice, is to just do everything so that I don't have to deal with, the real stuff that's going on. I wouldn't recommend it, but it happens.
I think that's really important, and I think it's something for us to watch out for. This idea of like I think it's this balance,
Yeah,
right?
totally.
Knowing, oh my gosh, when I am having a rough day, nothing lifts me up like helping somebody else. But we're also human beings, not
Yeah,
human doings. And, how do we make that space when we're ready to
yeah,
sort of and have the support to deal with those feelings. And I just want to say, I love what your friend did about calling the rabbi in Nashville. Like, reach
yeah,
out to the leaders in the community. I have a number of people who come meet with me before they even attend worship the first time because they have questions about how it works, or because they got stuff going on and they want somebody to talk to. It's
right.
okay. We're there for that. We're
Yeah,
there for that.
definitely. And kind of going back to your, helping others and helping yourself. Somebody recently said to me, you can't pour from an empty cup.
Right.
And I related to that because
Yeah.
that's something that I do. And I keep going back to this community
Yeah.
service element too, because
Yeah.
because I've seen it a lot with widows. And I think that one of a really cool story, there was a woman, Anne, that was in one of my support groups, and
Yeah.
she was volunteering at her local church, serving meals
Yeah.
to those in need. And what
Mm,
she said was that she enjoyed getting to know the people who were coming for the meals. It wasn't even as much around the volunteer
absolutely.
community or her
Yeah.
congregation. It was like every day, Tom was coming for his breakfast, and she got to know Tom and like his story and
Right.
his life story. And so she felt it, that connection. Because really, I think that is the number one thing that widows are seeking, is connection.
Yeah.
And it's really what I base this whole business on, is trying to form connections. And so I just think that, it's a beautiful place to be able to do that.
That's right.
Um, and the last thing, I'll go back to
Yeah.
is one of the things, when you talked about the threefold and you talked about finding meaning.
Mm-hmm.
I would say first is loneliness and the
Mm,
need for connection, and the second is, who am I now?
yeah.
Those are the top two things that I find widows struggle with, is, okay, I am no longer the wife or the partner or the, you know, girlfriend or boyfriend, whatever it is, of this person, or, who am I? And so I do believe that spirituality can help you find that meaning in different ways. And so I really love that you pointed that out, because I think that that's a big part of, self-discovery.
Yes.
Um,
I think one of the things that might be in a spiritual community that might not be in, a book club is
right,
this sort of existential question of why am I here? Why are we here? And being able to wrestle with that question with other people who are hurting,
Mm-hmm.
but also people who aren't hurting.
Right.
And to sort of have, dialogue partners
Yeah.
for that, I think can be,
Yeah.
I mean, maybe help people feel less alone.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Finding again, it's the combination of two. It's the connection with
Right.
people who have the same
Right.
belief system that you do
Yeah.
and who want to, form this new identity in the same way. So
Right.
it's kind of like a double whammy. Um,
That's the hope, right?
it's kind of like a double whammy. So tell me, we will end. I told you there was no trick questions, but this is not really tricky. But tell me something exciting that you have coming up with your congregation.
Oh, I'm so glad you asked. Okay. So I am having a dream come true. All right.
Okay.
So do you know what the Moth Radio Hour is?
I love the Moth Radio
Okay.
Hour. Don't
I'm
even
so
tell me, are
glad you.
you going to be on the Moth Radio
No,
Hour?
no, 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 no,
Oh,
no, no,
but
no.
you're doing something similar to it?
Yes. So we are having a moth style storytelling
Story
event.
Slam. Yes.
Yes. Well, not a slam because apparently a slam
Oh,
is a competition and it's not a competition.
right.
The
Yeah, yeah.
things I
Okay.
have learned. So,
Okay.
May 31st at 6 p.m. in the
Made in my
sanctuary of
calendar.
FCC Natick, we are kicking off Pride Month in Natick with a moth style storytelling event. We have expert storytellers as well as local Natick storytellers
God,
with
I love
people in
this.
the queer community sharing their stories.
Oh
And
my gosh,
I am
I love this so
so
much.
excited. I have wanted to do this for forever. So I'm not telling a story. I am just helping to organize it. And I'm so excited. So thank you for asking that.
Yes, no, I love that. And in fact, I am working on a kind of a different type of, or more of a day event in the fall
Mm,
for widows. And I have thought about that idea of doing, the power of storytelling is
yes.
so incredible. And, I do a lot of speaking myself, mainly on like podcasts and stuff. And I always say, I believe that a story shared is a story, a problem shared is a problem cut in half. And
Yeah.
that when you share your story, it
Yeah.
almost, it gives you purpose. And
Yeah.
I also always say, if one person in the audience or who's listening gets something out of this or feels a
Yeah.
little bit better, then it was
Yes.
worth the 20 minutes or whatever it is that you have. I
Absolutely.
love that so much. I can't wait to come. I'm so excited that I
Okay,
live
great.
here. Are you going to stream it?
We're not going to stream it. There was conversation about that. So we're
Oh,
working with someone
privacy.
who has done well, and also that the idea was sometimes, so we want this to feel like people are sitting around a dining room table, even though it's in a big room, or
Right.
like sitting around a campfire sharing stories. And sometimes the act of recording it and streaming it can feel
I get
different.
that. Yeah. Once
So
it came out of my mouth, I kind of
yeah,
was like, I
I
don't
I was
know.
wrestling with it because I'm like, I want to save it forever. But yeah, we're gonna have it as a moment. So
Well, maybe
May
in the future,
31st.
if it becomes a series of sorts, just so other people can hear it and participate in it. And but I think that is awesome. And I love the
Yes.
Moth Hour. Like
So
love.
if so many people have been like, I don't know what the moth is. I'm like, I just don't. I'm
Oh
gonna
my
have to
gosh,
send you a
I
list,
love it.
right?
I love it so much. In fact, don't laugh, but I was just recent. So my last retreat was in the Cape, and we went to dinner in Woodhull. And the reason I know Woodhull, Massachusetts, is because that's where they record the.
Yes.
And at the end, they always say production recording in Woodhull,
Yes.
Massachusetts. And I was so excited to be there because of the
That
moth.
is excellent. You're like
But
close to the moth.
yes, storytelling is, very important to society.
I
And
agree.
if you don't, it helps everyone feel a little less alone.
I think
And,
that's so true.
and I think that is true in my widow community as well,
Yeah.
is not everyone is going to go and, be comfortable with it.
Right.
But for those that are, I encourage people to share it because if you can
Yeah.
help someone feel a little bit less alone because of your experiences, and that's so beautiful.
Yes.
Well,
If I
thank
can
you
do anything
so
to
much.
help.
Yes. Yes. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm gonna come and take notes
Okay, great.
or learn a little bit about the behind the scenes because
I
I,
have
I really
resources to
would
share.
I
Yeah.
really would love to do something like that with the widow
I think that would be
community.
wonderful.
Because all of our stories are so unique.
That's right.
And yet, going back to when you're talking about the diversity, in the widow community, I find that all of our stories are unique, and
Yes.
yet we all are on even ground. We are
Yes.
all widows. We have all experienced the death of a spouse, a partner, and it doesn't matter. People kind of get into this like long-term anticipatory grief, versus, kind of this traumatic, instantaneous, and I'm always like, it doesn't matter. Go, like, I don't care. And, you even brought up a really good point too of, people who've had these storybook marriages and these people who've had really difficult marriages.
Yep.
To me, it doesn't matter. Like,
Yeah.
we're all here and now, and the
Right.
same thing has happened. And
That's
the
right.
past is the past. And yes, it informs, some degree of your grief, but we're all grieving.
Yeah.
Um,
And I love the way you're talking about story because I also think the way we're telling our story helps shape us and our lives. And I think sometimes I've seen people change how they tell the story
mhm,
over time. Sometimes I think that can be part of healing, not to
yeah.
be rushed or controlled by anybody else, but giving people a place
Hmm.
to keep working on that story
Hmm.
together, to own it,
Right.
rather than it sort of owning them, I think is wonderful.
In
Yeah.
fact, my very first guest that I interviewed for this conversation series was his name is Mark Carpenter, and he is a master storyteller. He's written books on how to, tell your story. And so it all, here we
I
are, full
love
circle.
it.
I love it. I love it. Anyway, well, that sounds really exciting. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your openness with us. I do, again, I am not a religiously affiliated widow association, and there are some really wonderful, Christian-based organizations out there. I know a woman named Michelle Eversole Bader. She runs an amazing one.
Mm.
However, I have seen how religious communities have been transformative and supportive to people going through widowhood. And so that was why it was so important for me to connect with you. And I'm really grateful that you came. Any last
Thank
minute shout
I just
outs,
want to
thoughts?
thank you, especially for your honesty and your vulnerability and your willingness to help others make meaning and find community in the worst time of their lives. So thank
Thank
you.
you so much. It was so great